My boss made me kiss him. What would you do in this situation? I hope you won't judge me too much for what I did. Now I'll tell you everything as it was. I never thought my career as a secretary would involve the kind of plot twists you'd find in a Netflix drama. But here we are. My name's Janet, I'm 25, and for the past 3 years, I've been working for Jim. Mr. Perfectly put together in his tailored suits and smooth confidence. He's 40, divorced, and basically a walking reminder that life doesn't slow down for anyone. I liked him. Okay, more than liked. Maybe it started when I caught him cracking a rare smile during a stressful meeting. Or maybe it was the way he says my name like it's something important. But Jim, he's oblivious. To him, I'm the dependable secretary who always has his coffee just right. But maybe I wasn't so invisible to him after all. It's funny, really, how quickly things can change. One minute, I'm humming through another monotonous Friday morning, filing papers and answering emails. The next, I'm standing in front of his office, my pulse thumping in my ears, wondering what the hell is going on. Janet, Jim had called, his voice smooth, but with a layer of something I couldn't place, something different from his usual businesslike tone. Come in here for a minute. My stomach fluttered. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt nervous. My hands felt clammy as I smoothed my blouse and walked toward his door. It wasn't like him to ask me into his office unless it was for something mundane. A scheduling question, a reminder about an upcoming meeting. But today, there was something in his voice that made my pulse race. When I stepped inside, he was standing by the window, his back to me. He turned as soon as I entered, his eyes locking onto mine with that familiar intensity. I could feel it in my chest. Something was off. His usual perfectly composed exterior was somehow different today. Loosened, maybe. His tie was slightly undone. His sleeves rolled up just enough to make him look less untouchable. Close the door, he said, his voice low, the hint of something unfamiliar in his words. I did as he asked, the soft click of the door behind me somehow making the room feel smaller. I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. What was this about? I tried to steady my thoughts, but my mind was already spiraling. Was I about to get fired? Or worse, was I being reassigned to a different department? Was my work not up to par? He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and I sat down, trying to maintain my composure. But my heart was hammering in my chest, each beat loud enough to echo in my ears. I wasn't prepared for this. What was this meeting? Janet, he started, his voice almost tender in a way that made my skin prickle. You've been doing great work. I've been thinking about moving you into a more advanced role, something with more responsibility. I froze. More responsibility? My breath hitched in my throat, and I had to force myself to breathe again. A promotion. This was what I'd been hoping for, right? It was the break I had been waiting for, an opportunity to prove myself, to show Jim that I could handle more. But his next words, those words, shattered the carefully constructed thoughts in my head. There's just one thing, he continued, his tone changing, lowering as he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the edge of the desk. A condition. My stomach dropped. A condition. What did that mean? My mind raced, visions of extra hours or demanding tasks flashing through my thoughts. But no, his eyes were watching me with a piercing intensity that I couldn't shake. I nodded, trying to act calm, but inside, I was anything but. What's the condition? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He didn't respond immediately. For a long moment, his gaze held mine, and I couldn't look away. His lips were barely parted, as if he were waiting for me to figure it out on my own. My throat went dry, and my heart started to beat even faster. Something was coming, and I could feel it. something I wasn't prepared for. Then finally, he spoke, his voice smooth, almost languid. "Kiss me and do something more interesting," he said, his gaze never faltering, his words as direct and deliberate as anything he had ever said to me. My world tilted. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment, I couldn't even comprehend what he had just said. Kiss him? Was I hearing things? I blinked, and it wasn't any clearer. His lips were still slightly parted, but now the warmth in his eyes made me feel like I was being drawn toward him, like some invisible thread was pulling me closer. I had to have misheard him. No, this wasn't happening. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind raced, trying to process what was unfolding before me. This was my boss, the man who had always been polite, professional, and seemingly indifferent to me beyond what was necessary. Jim, the man who had never looked at me like that. Or had he? I had always admired him from a distance, always pushed my feelings down, kept them locked away because that's what you do when you work for someone. But now he was asking me to cross a line, one that had always been clear and firm in my mind. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the unspoken barrier of professional distance, shattered in a single moment. "Jim," I finally managed, my voice a whisper, weak and uncertain. I don't understand. Why would you ask me that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on me. His expression was unreadable, but there was something raw there, something I couldn't quite place. A vulnerability, maybe? Or was it just something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge? "Because I can't stop thinking about it," he said finally, his voice soft, but there was no mistaking the seriousness behind it. "About you, and I think you know that." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Could it be true? Had he been aware of my feelings all along? Or was this some twisted power play, a test to see if I'd fall into his hands? I didn't know. I didn't know what to think, what to feel, or what to do. Part of me wanted to laugh, to tell him this was insane. Another part of me, maybe the part I had kept hidden for so long, was telling me to go for it, to let the boundaries blur just this once, to finally get a taste of what it might feel like to be more than just his secretary. "Jim, I can't. This isn't right," I stammered, my thoughts racing. "You're my boss. This isn't how it's supposed to be." He sighed, almost as if he had been expecting this. "I know," he said, his voice softer now, almost regretful. "But I've been thinking about this for a while, Janet. About you. And I don't want to pretend anymore that I don't feel this. Whatever this is between us. You don't have to do anything, but I'm giving you a choice. A chance. A chance. A chance at what? What was he offering me?" My heart thudded loudly in my chest. The room felt small, too small, and my thoughts were a mess. I wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of it all, but the words wouldn't come. The choice was mine. A kiss, just a kiss, could change everything. But could I take that step? Could I betray the boundaries I'd spent so long upholding? The instant my lips touched his, everything in the world seemed to fall away. There was no office, no paperwork, no expectations. Just the feel of his lips against mine, warm, firm, and entirely real. It wasn't like the soft, tentative kisses I had imagined in my daydreams. No, this kiss was full of intent, of something more profound, more dangerous than I'd ever anticipated. I felt a shock of heat radiate from where his fingers grazed the fabric of my blouse, his touch both grounding and electrifying. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo through my entire body. For a moment, neither of us moved, and the world outside his office ceased to exist. Time itself seemed to stretch, each second lasting an eternity. His breath mingled with mine, slow and deep, as though he was savoring the moment, just as I was. My thoughts were clouded, overwhelmed by the sensation of being so close to him, of feeling him like this, no longer my boss, no longer the man I had always admired from a distance, but someone real, someone with the same emotions, the same vulnerability, the same hesitations. When he pulled away, it wasn't abrupt. It wasn't harsh. He simply released me, his hand still resting lightly on my hips. I didn't move at first. I didn't know what to say. What could I possibly say? My breath was shallow, my chest tight, my mind still reeling. Jim's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something different in them, something I hadn't seen before. There was no indifference, no cold professionalism. His gaze was soft, but it was also intense, like he was searching for something in me, something he wasn't sure he'd find. He pointed me down and I sat on my knees and did what I did. I couldn't move. I wanted to pull away, to catch my breath. In 10 minutes we were finished. I felt a rush of emotions flood through me. Relief, surprise, confusion. But there was something else too, a glimmer of hope, something I hadn't dared to let myself feel. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it wasn't the way I had imagined it in my fantasies, all those times I daydreamed about him. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said, standing up and moving toward me. His presence was overwhelming, filling the space between us. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them, the significance. My head and my heart were at war. What did this mean for us? For my career? For everything I had thought I knew? But right now, all I could do was stand there, looking at him, really looking at him, feeling the pull between us. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't have all the answers. But that was okay. I wasn't sure where we'd go from here, but I wasn't afraid to find out. The first thing I did after leaving work that day was call Emma. She was my best friend, the one person who never held back, who always told me exactly what I needed to hear, even if it wasn't what I wanted. And today, I needed her more than ever. "Meet me at our usual spot," I said, my voice strained, still processing everything that had just happened. "It's an emergency." I didn't have to wait long. 15 minutes later, I was sitting across from her in our favorite corner booth at the diner, stirring a cup of tea I wasn't even drinking. Emma had a milkshake in front of her, sipping it slowly, her eyes watching me closely. "You look like you're about to burst," she said, leaning forward, her tone half teasing, half concerned. I glanced around the diner, trying to focus on anything that wasn't my swirling thoughts. "You remember how I've been, kind of into Jim." "Your boss, Jim," she said, raising an eyebrow. "The hot one. Please, you've only mentioned him like 1,000 times. What happened? Did he finally smile at you again?" I swallowed hard. This was not how I had imagined telling her about what happened. "No, he asked me to kiss him." Emma froze. Her milkshake hovered midair before she set it down with a slight clink. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. He asked me to kiss him. And then he said it wasn't mandatory, that it wouldn't change anything about the promotion he'd been talking about." But I trailed off, unsure how to say the next part. I did it. I kissed him. Emma stared at me, blinking as if she couldn't quite process the words I had just spoken. Then finally, her mouth dropped open, and she practically shouted, "Janet, are you serious? That's so messed up. Like, how are you not freaking out right now?" "I am freaking out," I admitted, my fingers tightening around the cup of tea I hadn't taken a sip from. But it wasn't about the promotion. It wasn't like that. I've wanted to kiss him for so long, and today, he just said the words, and I couldn't not do it. Janet, you can't just let it slide like that. Emma's voice dropped to a low, urgent tone. This is serious. He's your boss. This is all kinds of inappropriate. The power dynamics, the HR issues, everything. Do you know how badly this could backfire? I know, I said, biting my lip. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, but there was something else tugging at me. But when I kissed him, it felt real. Like there was something between us that neither of us could ignore anymore. Emma's face softened, though there was still concern there. Okay, but what does that mean for you? For your career, for him? What happens now? I leaned back in the booth, feeling the weight of her question. I have no idea. I'm just as lost as you are, Emma. But I know it was more than just a random kiss. It felt important, like it changed something. Important. Emma repeated, disbelief mixing with her tone. Janet, this isn't a rom-com. This is real life. And I need you to think about what this could do to your job, your reputation. What if he decides he wants more? What if it gets twisted into something ugly? I'm not saying I haven't thought about all that, I said quickly, my voice soft but firm. But I think he feels it too. There's something between us. And now that we've crossed that line, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't just pretend like it didn't matter. Emma sighed, shaking her head, her eyes never leaving me. This is a mess, Janet. I can't say I support it, but I get it. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? This could go downhill so fast, and I don't want you getting hurt. I will, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't entirely sure I could promise that, but I meant it. I'll be careful. I can't ignore it. Not anymore. Emma studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing everything I had just said. Then, with a deep breath, she leaned back in the booth and grabbed her milkshake again, taking a sip as if she were still processing it all. Okay, but you've got to promise me one more thing. Anything, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. If things get complicated, and they will, you come to me first. Don't let it spiral. Don't get lost in it. Promise. I promise, I said, the words heavy with sincerity. I'll talk to you. Always. She gave me a small, worried smile, though I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. I didn't blame her. This whole situation was a mess, and I was in way over my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between Jim and me. Something I wasn't ready to let go of just yet, no matter how messy it got. The conversation shifted after that, but my mind was still spinning with everything Emma had said, with everything I had just confessed. I had no idea where this would go. But whatever happened, I couldn't take it back. I had already crossed that line, and now all I could do was wait and see if I could survive what came next. The next day, the office felt charged with an energy I couldn't shake. I moved through my tasks like I was on autopilot, organizing his meetings, answering emails, keeping things running smoothly. But inside, my mind was a whirlwind. The kiss from yesterday played on repeat in my head, the way his lips felt against mine, the heat that burned between us. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was he going to pretend it never happened, or was something more about to unfold? After lunch, the tension hit a breaking point. Jim called a team meeting, his voice as smooth and commanding as always. But today there was something in the air that felt different, charged, electric. I tried to focus, but the words were distant as I watched him stand at the front of the room, his tailored suit hugging his broad shoulders perfectly. The way he moved, so effortlessly powerful, made my pulse quicken. He looked at me then, his gaze piercing through the room and landing on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Janet," he announced, voice smooth like velvet. "I'm pleased to say that she'll be moving into a more advanced role. She's earned it." The words didn't seem to reach me as his eyes stayed locked on mine. "And I'm looking forward to having her work closely with me as part of her training." I felt my breath hitch. He didn't even break eye contact. My stomach fluttered as a small smile tugged at his lips, a look that made my heart race and my pulse throb in places it shouldn't. It wasn't just a professional announcement, it was personal. And I knew it. The room felt smaller, the weight of his words heavier, like we were alone in that moment, even though everyone else was present. The meeting wrapped up, but I couldn't focus on anything. My hands were trembling slightly as I sat back down at my desk, my heart hammering in my chest. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to act around him? Was he going to address it? Before I could think too much about it, the phone rang, Jim's voice on the other end. "Janet, come to my office for a moment." I stood up, my legs unsteady, the weight of what had happened between us pulling me forward. My heart raced as I walked to his office, my thoughts swirling faster than I could process. The door clicked shut behind me with a quiet finality, and suddenly we were alone. He stood across from me for a long moment, eyes scanning my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. Then finally, he spoke, his voice low and intimate. "Congratulations on your promotion," he murmured, his words sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm looking forward to working with you more closely." I tried to say something, anything, but my throat went dry. Before I could form the words, he moved toward me, the air between us crackling with tension. I barely had time to react before his hand came up to gently cup my face. My breath caught in my throat as his lips found mine, his kiss deep and demanding. It wasn't like the first time. This kiss was all heat, all passion. His mouth claimed mine with an urgency I hadn't expected, as though he couldn't wait any longer. My hands instinctively found his chest, fingers pressing against the smooth fabric of his shirt as I pulled him closer. The taste of him was intoxicating, and I melted into the kiss, my body responding to his touch without hesitation. His hand slid down my back, pulling me against him with a low groan, and I could feel the hard length of him pressed against my body. I gasped, the reality of what was happening crashing over me. This wasn't just a kiss. This was something else entirely, something deeper, more primal. He didn't pull away. Instead, he deepened the kiss, his lips moving with purpose, his tongue tracing the edge of my mouth, and I couldn't stop myself from responding. I wanted more. I needed more. Without a word, he backed me toward the wall, and I barely noticed until my back hit the cool surface, his body following mine. His hands roamed to the back of my neck, pulling me closer still, and I arched into him, my hands threading through his hair, tugging him closer as the kiss became more urgent, more heated. It was like nothing else existed but us. The office, the promotion, the world outside, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the electric tension between us, the heat building every time his lips brushed mine, every time his hands touched me, as if he were mapping out every inch of me, claiming it as his. My breath came in shallow gasps as he kissed me harder, more possessively. His lips trailed down my neck, kissing, sucking, making me gasp as his hands slid down my sides, pulling me against him. Every touch, every movement of his hands set my body on fire, and I couldn't stop myself from responding. I wanted him, just like I had wanted him for so long. "God, Janet," he whispered against my skin, his voice thick with desire. "You have no idea how much I've wanted this." I had no words. None of this made sense, but in the moment, I didn't care. I was lost in him, in the heat of his touch, the way his body moved against mine. My hands moved to his belt, fingers trembling as I fumbled with it, wanting to feel more of him. A week later, Jim asked me to join him on a business trip. He told me it was for a client meeting, but as we boarded the flight and headed toward a charming coastal city, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just business. The closer we got to our destination, the more I sensed the shift in the air between us. This wasn't the usual work trip. This felt different. When we checked into the hotel, I was proven right. The boutique hotel was charming, with rooms that overlooked the ocean, and everything about it screamed luxury and relaxation. There was an intimacy in the air, something unspoken. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but I knew deep down that there was something more to this trip than meetings and presentations. That evening, we went through the motions of a work dinner, discussing tomorrow's schedule, client expectations, and future plans. But the atmosphere was different now, charged with a quiet tension that neither of us could ignore. As we finished the meal, Jim looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. "We should go over tomorrow's schedule," he said, his voice smooth. But there was a glint in his gaze that suggested he wasn't talking about work at all. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need him to say anything more. The way he was looking at me told me everything I needed to know. The teasing smile, the way he seemed to take his time with every word, it was deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. I followed him to his room, the quiet of the hotel hallway amplifying the racing of my heart. His room was spacious, a soft golden light spilling from the lamps and the open curtains that revealed the moonlit ocean. A bottle of red wine sat uncorked on the table, a single glass already poured. I felt my breath catch as he handed me the glass, his fingers brushing against mine, the touch lingering just long enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Relax," Jim said, his voice low and smooth. "This trip isn't entirely about work." The words hung in the air, unspoken promises lacing each syllable. I took a sip of the wine, trying to steady my nerves, but my gaze never left him. He moved closer, the space between us closing with every step, his presence overwhelming in the best way. I could feel the heat radiating from him, and the tension that had been building between us for weeks now felt palpable. Jim reached for me then, his hand cupping my face gently as he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, soft at first, as though testing the waters. But I didn't need him to test anything. I wanted this. I needed this. I closed the gap between us, tilting my head up to meet him halfway. His kiss deepened instantly, hungry, demanding, as though everything he'd been holding back was being unleashed in that moment. I responded just as fervently, my hands sliding up to his chest, feeling the warmth of his body under the fabric of his shirt. The kiss was a dance, intimate and slow, but with an urgency that took over everything. I wanted more, and he seemed to want the same. He broke the kiss for just a second, his lips trailing down my neck as he gently pushed me back toward the bed. The cool sheets greeted me as he leaned over me, his hands caressing my sides, pulling me closer to him. The air between us was thick with anticipation. Our bodies pressed together in a way that felt both electric and comforting. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, steady and fast, a rhythm we both seemed to follow without thinking. His lips were back on mine, this time more insistent, as if he couldn't wait any longer. His hands moved lower, tracing the curve of my waist, and I couldn't help but arch into him, my hands gripping his shoulders as I pulled him closer. We were both breathless now, our bodies entwined on the bed, a slow burn building between us. Jim's touch was tender but possessive, his hands exploring, taking in every detail of me as if he were memorizing every inch. I responded eagerly, my fingers trailing down his chest, feeling the heat of his skin beneath the layers of clothing. He groaned softly when my hands reached the hem of his shirt, pulling it off over his head with a sense of urgency. The sight of him, so close, so real, was almost too much. I ran my hands over his chest, feeling the firmness of his muscles, the heat radiating off him. He kissed me again, deep and long, his hands now working at the buttons of my blouse. There was a certain intensity in the way he moved, like he had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. The world outside the room seemed to disappear as we continued, everything becoming a blur except for the way our bodies responded to each other. Every kiss, every touch, every breath between us only brought us closer, as if we were two halves of a whole finally coming together. And when we finally gave in to the tension, when our bodies aligned completely, it was like nothing else mattered. There was no need for words, no need for hesitation. Just the two of us, finally giving in to everything we had been holding back.